Beneath the glamour, the red carpets, and the shimmering lights of old Hollywood lies a truth few ever see, a world built not just on talent, but on unrelenting grit, pain, and survival. Before they were legends, they were nobodies, children of poverty, orphans, runaways, sons and daughters of broken homes, factory workers, street performers, and silent shadows in the background of a dream too big for the lives they were born into. They weren't born into fame, they clawed their way toward it. The Hollywood of the Golden Age didn't welcome them with open arms. It chewed people up and spat them out. For those who came from nothing, the odds were worse than impossible. But somehow, they endured, they rose, they defied every rule of who gets to be remembered. This is not just a tribute to their stardom. This is a journey through the scars they carried and the dreams they refused to let die. These are the stories of old Hollywood stars who came from nothing. Charlie Chaplin. Before the bowler hat, before the mustache, before the world laughed with him, Charlie Chaplin lived a life no child should ever endure. Born in 1889 in the slums of South London, he was raised in a world of hunger, sickness, and silence. His father was an alcoholic who abandoned the family early. His mother, a singer with a fragile mind, slipped into madness before Charlie was even 10. He and his brother were left to survive on their own, often sleeping on the streets or confined to workhouses where the air stank of despair and the only certainty was starvation. There were nights he didn't eat, days he wandered the streets barefoot, watching others live the life he was denied. He learned to make people laugh, because if they were laughing, they weren't looking too closely, and if he could make them smile, maybe, just maybe, he could survive another day. But Charlie didn't just survive, he transformed his pain into something eternal. When he finally found his way to the stage, it wasn't fame he chased, it was escape. And when he created the little tramp, that silent, bumbling figure with the sad eyes and hopeful heart, he wasn't inventing a character. He was revealing a part of himself that had long been hidden beneath poverty and fear. Charlie Chaplin would go on to become the most recognizable face in the world, without ever saying a word. But the world never truly knew the boy behind the laughter. The boy who came from nothing and gave everything. Frank Sinatra. He was the voice of a generation.
You're riding high in April, shot down in May. Two lonely people, we were strangers in the night.
The swagger in a tuxedo. The man who could make a single note feel like heartbreak. But before the fame, before the screaming crowds and the Rat Pack glory, Frank Sinatra was just a skinny kid from Hoboken, New Jersey, a nobody, with a crooked smile and a hunger that went far deeper than fame. Born in 1915 to Italian immigrants, Sinatra grew up on the rough side of the tracks. His father boxed in back rooms to put food on the table. His mother, fiery and relentless, scraped together what little she could to keep the lights on. But money was scarce, respect even scarcer. Frank was small, often sickly, and never quite fit in. He was expelled from high school for nothing more than being himself, mouthy, restless, full of too much ambition for a town that had none to offer. There was no plan, no path, just the dream of a microphone and the sound of a big band playing somewhere far from the grime and grit of Hoboken. He sang in dives, in dingy clubs wherever they'd have him, and he didn't rise. He fought his way up, note by note, charm by charm. They said he was too skinny, too slick, too street. But the moment he opened his mouth, people stopped breathing. He sang like he had lived 1,000 lives, because he had, in his own way. By the time Hollywood came calling, Sinatra wasn't just a voice, he was a force. A man who turned rejection into rhythm, who made pain sound like poetry. Frank Sinatra didn't become a star. He forced the world to notice him. He was the poor kid with a dream too big for Hoboken, and a voice too big for the world to ignore. Humphrey Bogart.
Little things like that make enough. Hello.
He wasn't born with matinee looks. He didn't have the classic Hollywood charm or the polished glow of a studio favorite. But what Humphrey Bogart had was something deeper, something grittier, a stare that could freeze a man, and a voice that sounded like it had been soaked in whiskey and regret. Before Casablanca, before the Maltese Falcon, Bogart was just a trouble-prone kid from New York. His family had money, but not happiness. His father, a stern and distant surgeon. His mother, a commercial illustrator who once used young Bogart's face for baby food ads. The household was cold, more performance than parenting. He was sent to elite schools, but he didn't belong. He got into fights. He cut class. He drifted. He was dishonorably discharged from the Navy for bad conduct, a black mark that would follow him for years. When he turned to acting, it wasn't out of passion. It was survival, a way to hide behind something or someone other than himself. In the early years, he played background roles, forgettable faces in forgettable films. Hollywood didn't know what to do with him. Too rough, too strange, not handsome enough. But Bogart didn't care about being liked. He wanted to be real, and then it happened. A gangster role, a cynical detective, a man pushed too far. Suddenly, Bogart wasn't acting anymore. He was showing the world who he really was, wounded, hardened, unapologetically human. By the time he looked into Ingrid Bergman's eyes and said, "Here's looking at you, kid," he had already stared down the worst life had to offer, and he didn't blink. Humphrey Bogart never chased stardom. He carved it out of stone. He was the underdog the system couldn't break, a man who turned rejection into legend, a man who came from nothing and left behind a legacy no one could ever forget. Clark Gable to the world. He was the king of Hollywood.
All we've got is cotton and slaves and arrogance.
That's treacherous!
Commanding, confident, impossibly charismatic. But Clark Gable didn't grow up in palaces. He came from dirt, grease, and heartbreak. Born in 1901 in a tiny town in Ohio, Gable's life was marred by tragedy from the start. His mother died before he could even form memories of her. His father, a rough-edged oil driller, was more interested in hard labor than raising a son. There was no softness in Gable's upbringing, just work, just survival. He dropped out of school at 16. No prospects, no plan. Just a dream he was too embarrassed to say out loud, that maybe, somehow, he could be an actor. But the road was brutal. He worked in factories, laid telephone cables, slept in cars, and barely scraped together enough to eat. Hollywood wasn't just far away. It was a different universe. And yet, he refused to quit. Gable took acting classes at night, worked backstage at tiny theaters, learned from the ground up. Every no only made him dig deeper. Every closed door became fuel. And slowly, painfully, the parts came. Then the stardom. He wasn't just another pretty face. He was something else. A man carved out of hard years with a stare that told a story before he ever spoke a word. When he finally landed Gone with the Wind, he wasn't acting as Rhett Butler. He was channeling every ounce of rebellion, defiance, and pain he'd carried with him from those early years of being overlooked and underestimated. Clark Gable never forgot where he came from, that steel beneath the charm, that weight in his voice. It came from a boy who had once been lost in the shadows of Ohio oil fields. He didn't inherit a crown. He earned it, one broken dream at a time. Bette Davis, she wasn't beautiful in the traditional sense.
What a dump.
Not by Hollywood standards. Her eyes were too sharp, her voice too fierce, her presence too bold. But Bette Davis didn't come to Hollywood to be beautiful. She came to dominate it, and she started with nothing. Born in 1908 in Lowell, Massachusetts, her childhood was defined by absence and struggle. Her father walked out when she was a child, leaving her mother, a single woman in a judgmental world, to raise two daughters alone. They lived frugally, moving often, always a step behind stability. Betty watched her mother take on backbreaking jobs to keep the family afloat, and something hardened in her, a determination, a fire. She wouldn't just survive, she would command. From a young age, she knew she wasn't like the other girls. She didn't want to be loved. She wanted to be respected. She started in theater, often overlooked, often underestimated. Casting agents called her Mousy. When she first arrived in Hollywood, a studio rep left her at the train station because he couldn't believe that was the girl they had signed. But she didn't flinch. Bette Davis fought for every role. She turned down easy scripts, clashed with studio heads, and sued Warner Brothers when they tried to trap her in mediocrity. She didn't smile for approval. She didn't bow for the spotlight. She dared it to meet her on her own terms. Her performances were electric, raw, unfiltered, often uncomfortable. She played women with edges, women who were bitter, broken, powerful, and real. She didn't want to be adored. She wanted to be unforgettable. And she was. Bette Davis didn't climb her way to the top. She tore down walls, brick by brick, with nothing but willpower and rage. She was the storm Hollywood never saw coming, a girl from nowhere who rewrote the rules for every woman that followed. James Stewart, he wasn't flashy. He didn't smolder on screen or swagger like the others.
Here, you're all businessmen here. Doesn't it make them better citizens? Doesn't it make them better customers?
But James Stewart had something far rarer, sincerity. And behind that gentle voice and slow drawl was a man who knew what it meant to come from almost nothing and carry the weight of everything. Born in 1908 in a small Pennsylvania town, Stewart was the son of a hardware store owner. It was a simple life. Honest work, long days, modest dreams. His father had hoped he'd take over the shop someday, but James had other plans. Plans he barely dared to say aloud. He was awkward, shy, a little too lanky, a little too quiet. He didn't fit the mold of a leading man, and when he first stepped into acting, no one saw a star. He was told he was too slow, too plain, too ordinary, but that's exactly what made him extraordinary. He wasn't trying to act like something else. He was just being who he was, and the truth in him was undeniable. Even as his career slowly began to grow, Stewart kept getting passed over for the flashier roles. He played the nice guy, the humble guy, the guy who always came second, until the world finally realized that was the hero. Then came the war. At the height of his rising fame, he didn't hesitate. He joined the Army Air Corps, flew combat missions in World War II, and returned not with fanfare, but with quiet dignity. When he came back, his performances changed, deeper, more human. In It's a Wonderful Life, he wasn't playing a part. He was speaking for every man who'd lost something, fought for something, or wondered if they mattered. James Stewart didn't conquer Hollywood. He earned its trust, one honest word at a time. A small-town boy with a soft voice and a spirit that still echoes in every story about hope, decency, and grace. He didn't come from privilege, he came from the people, and he never forgot that. Joan Crawford, before the gowns, the diamonds, and the Oscar, she was just Lucille, a poor girl from Texas scrubbing floors to eat. Joan Crawford's rise wasn't a fairy tale. It was a battle, one she fought every single day of her life. Born in 1904, abandoned by her father and raised by a mother who bounced from job to job, Lucille Fay LeSueur grew up with nothing but instability and survival instincts. She spent her childhood in boarding schools she couldn't afford, scrubbing toilets and working in laundries just to stay enrolled. Other girls studied. She worked until her hands bled. Poverty wasn't just a phase for her, it was a prison, and the only escape she could see was Hollywood. She started as a dancer, a chorus girl. She wasn't the most graceful, not the most naturally gifted, but she had drive, the kind that scared people. She'd rehearse until her feet were raw, smile until her jaw ached, reinvent herself 1,000 times if it meant getting closer to the camera. Even her name, Joan Crawford, was chosen by a publicity contest, and she hated it. But she wore it like armor. She didn't charm her way to the top. She clawed her way up, one picture at a time. When others faded, she adapted. When the studios turned cold, she turned colder. She refused to vanish, refused to be forgotten. Behind the glamour, there was always that frightened, hungry girl from Texas, the one who had slept in hand-me-downs and worked through blistered nights just to exist. The world saw an icon, but Joan never stopped seeing the girl who had been discarded. And maybe that's why she fought so hard, because she knew what it was like to have nothing, and she would never go back. Joan Crawford didn't just survive Hollywood, she outlasted it. A storm in satin, a legend forged in desperation, a woman who came from nowhere and demanded the world remember her name. Rita Hayworth to millions, she was the love goddess, the red-haired siren who lit up the screen and left hearts aching in her wake. But before Rita Hayworth was Hollywood's dream, she was a child trapped in a nightmare, dancing not for joy, but for survival. She was born Margarita Carmen Cancino in 1918 to a family of Spanish dancers. Her father, a strict and domineering man, pushed her into performing before she could understand applause. By the time she was 12, she wasn't playing with dolls. She was dancing in seedy clubs alongside her father, the bright lights hiding the shadows behind the curtain. There was no childhood, no safety, just long nights, aching feet, and a silent kind of fear she would carry with her for life. She never chose the spotlight. It was forced on her. But when the studios came calling, they didn't want Margarita Cancino. They wanted someone new. So they changed her, dyed her hair, raised her hairline through painful electrolysis, reshaped her accent, her name, her very identity. Rita Hayworth wasn't born, she was built. And yet through all of it, she remained graceful, vulnerable, mysterious. On screen, she shimmered. But off screen, she was haunted by the girl who had never been allowed to be a girl. She gave the world her beauty, her voice, her soul. But inside, she still carried the weight of those lonely nights on stage, dancing for people who never saw her, only the fantasy she was told to become. Rita Hayworth's story wasn't one of privilege. It was a story of survival in a system that tried to mold her, control her, erase her past. But no matter how much they changed her, she never forgot who she was. She came from nothing and became the woman every spotlight followed. Even if deep down, she never stopped searching for herself. Cary Grant seemed like he was born for the silver screen. Effortless charm, a dazzling smile, and a voice that could melt stone. But Cary Grant wasn't born. He was made, forged in hardship, loneliness, and a deep yearning to escape. He came into the world as Archibald Leach in 1904, in the grey industrial heart of Bristol, England. His childhood was not a story of wonder, but of confusion and heartbreak. At just 9 years old, he came home one day to find his mother gone. He was told she had gone away for a rest. In truth, she had been committed to a mental institution, and Archie wouldn't know that until he was a grown man. His father quickly moved on, remarried, and left the boy to fend for himself. Abandoned emotionally and eventually physically, Cary became invisible, a ghost in his own life. So, he ran. At just 14, he joined a traveling acrobat troupe, sleeping in train cars and learning to walk on stilts before he ever learned what love felt like. Vaudeville took him to America, and America gave him hope. It was here, across the Atlantic, that Archibald Leach disappeared and Cary Grant began. But even then, Hollywood wasn't easy. His early years were filled with rejection, roles that mocked his accent, and studios that saw him as little more than a pretty face. But beneath that face was a mind, calculating, sharp, and endlessly adaptable. He studied the rich, mimicked the elegant, and sculpted himself into the image of a gentleman. Not because he was one, but because he had never had that life, and he wanted to prove he belonged in it. Cary Grant became the man every man wanted to be, and every woman wanted to know. But behind the charm, there was always that lost boy. From Bristol, the one who had once been told he didn't matter. He didn't inherit elegance. He crafted it, not from silk and champagne, but from scars. Cary Grant came from nothing and turned himself into everything. Barbara Stanwyck, she was tough, steel under silk, a woman who looked life in the eye and dared it to blink first. But Barbara Stanwyck didn't learn strength on a soundstage. She learned it in the gutters of real life, long before the world ever knew her name. Born Ruby Catherine Stevens in 1907, her story began in Brooklyn, in the kind of poverty that doesn't leave bruises, it leaves scars. Her mother died when she was just 4, pushed off a streetcar in a tragic accident. Her father vanished soon after, leaving her an orphan before she even knew what the word meant. She was passed from one foster home to another. Some were kind, most were not. She raised herself, fending off the world with a glare and a backbone. No child should have to develop so early. At 14, she dropped out of school. Education wouldn't save her. Work might. She took whatever jobs she could find, wrapping packages, filing papers, even working as a chorus girl. She was never the best dancer, never the most glamorous, but she showed up, early, every day, and never complained. She didn't have time for excuses. Survival didn't allow them. Hollywood wasn't waiting for her. It didn't roll out red carpets for girls like Ruby. But when she stepped in front of a camera, something electric happened. Her voice, smoky, cool, unmistakably real. Her eyes, full of secrets and fire. She didn't play fragile women. She played women who had lived. Barbara Stanwyck never pretended to be someone else. She didn't need to. The pain, the struggle, the grit, it was all right there, in every role. From noir to melodrama, she made it clear. She hadn't just read about hardship, she had survived it. She didn't rise on luck, she rose on will. And though she never won an Oscar in competition, she didn't need one. Her legacy was carved in every performance, every line delivered like a promise, that no matter where you come from, you can still rise. Barbara Stanwyck came from nothing, and she made nothing look unstoppable. James Cagney. He didn't look like a movie star. He didn't act like one. But James Cagney had something the studios couldn't package. Fire. A restless, relentless energy that seemed to burst off the screen. And that fire was forged in the crucible of poverty, long before the lights of Hollywood ever found him. Born in 1899 on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, Cagney grew up in a neighborhood where hunger and hardship were part of the daily routine. His father was a struggling bartender and alcoholic. His mother, the unshakable pillar who held the family together with scraps and grit. The Cagney household was crowded, loud, and always on the edge of collapse. As a kid, James ran errands. fought in the streets and worked odd jobs just to help keep the family afloat. He knew early on that nobody was coming to rescue him. If he wanted out, he'd have to fight his way through, literally and figuratively. He never trained to be an actor. In fact, he stumbled into show business as a fill-in dancer. But what he lacked in polish, he made up for in presence. There was something about him, dangerous, sharp, unpredictable. He didn't smile to charm you. He smiled like a man who already knew your next move. Hollywood didn't quite know what to do with him at first. He didn't fit the mold. But when he exploded onto the screen in The Public Enemy, the world paid attention. He wasn't just playing a gangster. He was every angry, scrappy kid who'd grown up on the streets with nothing but his fists and his pride. Even when he danced like a brawler, light on his feet but ready to strike. Off-screen, he refused to play the Hollywood game. He battled studios, turned down roles that insulted his intelligence, and insisted on respect, something he had to earn the hard way his entire life. James Cagney didn't act tough. He was tough, not because he wanted to be, but because he had to be. A kid from the gutters of New York, who punched his way to the top and dared anyone to try and take it from him. He came from nothing, and he never let the world forget it. Greta Garbo was the enigma of the silver screen, distant, untouchable, hypnotic. Greta Garbo didn't need words to mesmerize. Her silence was louder than most voices, but behind the haunting stare and the timeless beauty was a girl who had once been lost in the cold grey shadows of poverty. She was born Greta Lovisa Gustafsson in 1905, in the slums of Stockholm, Sweden. Her family was poor, desperately so. Her father was a janitor who fell ill and died when Greta was just 14. After that, life became a grind. There were no dreams, only duty. She left school and went to work, first as a lather girl, in a barbershop, then as a clerk in a department store. Every day was the same. Grey streets, cold hands, heavy eyes. But there was something in her, a deep, quiet yearning for more. Not just for comfort, but for escape, for transformation. When she was asked to appear in a department store ad film, she said yes, not because she believed in fame, but because she needed the money. That tiny, flickering role led to drama school, and drama school led to a screen test. Suddenly, the quiet girl from the slums was on a boat to America. Hollywood didn't know what to make of her at first. She didn't laugh easily. She didn't play the starlet game. She barely spoke English, but when the camera turned on, she didn't have to say a word. Her eyes did all the speaking. Garbo became a sensation, mysterious, divine, distant, but the truth was simpler. She was shy, guarded, always afraid the world would look too closely and see the girl she once was, the daughter of a janitor, the teenager who wept alone in a freezing apartment, the young woman who never really felt like she belonged. She left Hollywood at the height of her fame, retreating into a life of silence, and yet her image endured, frozen in time, still haunting, still perfect. Greta Garbo didn't chase stardom, she endured it. A girl from the frozen streets of Stockholm who transformed her pain into poetry and never let the world see the cracks beneath the goddess. She came from nothing and became the woman no one could ever forget. Lauren Bacall, she had the voice, that low, smoky drawl that could stop time. She had the eyes, sharp, sultry, knowing. But Lauren Bacall didn't arrive in Hollywood as a star. She arrived as a scared, determined teenager from the Bronx, with no connections, no money, and everything to prove. Born Betty Joan Perskay in 1924 to a working-class Jewish family, her childhood was marked by absence. Her father left when she was just 5, vanishing without a trace. It was just her and her mother after that, scraping by, one paycheck at a time. They lived in small apartments, leaned on relatives, and never stopped pushing forward. Betty found escape in the movies. She would sit in the darkened theaters of New York and watch Bette Davis and Katharine Hepburn light up the screen, imagining herself there, not as a dream, but as a destination. She studied acting, worked as a theater usher, and modeled on the side to pay for lessons. She was 17, broke, and hungry in every sense. Her break came like lightning. A single photograph on a magazine cover, poised, piercing, unforgettable, caught the attention of director Howard Hawks. He brought her to Hollywood, changed her name, and introduced her to a new world. But Bacall didn't just walk into that world, she owned it. On the set of her very first film, To Have and Have Not, she delivered a line that would echo through cinema history. "You know how to whistle, don't you, Steve?" It wasn't a performance. It was a warning. This wasn't some girl next door. This was a woman who had fought her way out of the shadows. Behind that cool exterior was still the Bronx girl who had worked coat check, dodged bill collectors, and stood outside theaters hoping to catch a glimpse of the life she now lived. Lauren Bacall wasn't discovered. She forced the world to see her, with strength, with grace, with a stare that said, "I've already survived worse than you." She came from nothing and turned every door that was closed to her into an entrance. Spencer Tracy. He didn't wear the polished armor of a Hollywood leading man. No theatrics, no pretense. Spencer Tracy was real, unshakably, undeniably real. On screen, he spoke like a man who'd lived 100 quiet heartbreaks. And off screen, he carried the kind of scars that never show up in close-ups. Born in 1900 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Tracy came from working-class roots. His father ran a truck company. His mother kept the house together with firm hands and tighter budgets. There was no spotlight in his youth, just grit, rules, and the looming sense that failure was always waiting if you let your guard down. He was restless from the beginning, struggled in school, got expelled more than once. Authority rubbed him raw. Words didn't come easily. He battled dyslexia long before anyone knew what to call it. They said he was slow, unfocused, difficult. What they didn't see was a boy fighting just to keep up, afraid of being left behind. When World War I broke out, he enlisted in the Navy as a teenager, desperate for purpose. He never saw combat, but the discipline changed him, or maybe it just gave his chaos a direction. After the war, he found his way to acting, almost by accident. And once he stepped onto a stage, something clicked. Hollywood didn't come running. His early roles were modest. But what Tracy had, what few ever did, was truth. No affectation, no grandstanding, just quiet power. When he spoke, people leaned in. Not because he shouted, but because he didn't have to. He went on to win 2 Academy Awards, but he never bought into the myth of stardom. He stayed private, tormented by his own demons, and grounded by a childhood that had taught him not to trust comfort. He never sought to be idolized, only understood. Spencer Tracy didn't climb the ladder of fame with charm or shine. He did it with weight, with depth, with the soul of a man who never forgot where he came from, or how close he had come to never escaping it. He came from nothing, and gave us everything he had, quietly, completely, unforgettably. Marlene Dietrich moved like smoke, spoke like velvet, and turned heads with a glance. Marlene Dietrich wasn't just a star, she was an atmosphere. Cool, controlled, untouchable. But behind the sultry mystique and androgynous style was a girl from Berlin who had seen the world break and refused to be broken with it. Born in 1901 as Marie Magdalene Dietrich, she grew up in a strict conservative household in Germany. Her father, a military officer, died when she was a child. Her stepfather, distant and severe, ruled with cold discipline. Emotion was a weakness, beauty was currency, and love, that was something you earned, not something you were given. She dreamed of the arts, music, theater, poetry, but dreams didn't pay rent. After struggling through school, she picked up modeling jobs and chorus girl gigs, never quite fitting into the mold. Too bold, too different, too Marlene. She learned quickly that the world wouldn't open doors for women like her, so she stopped knocking. She started breaking them down. Her big break came in The Blue Angel, a role that turned her into an icon overnight. Hollywood noticed, and when she arrived in America, she didn't try to fit in. She made Hollywood bend to her. With tailored suits, bedroom eyes, and a voice dipped in smoke, she blurred lines between man and woman, power and seduction, vulnerability and strength. But beneath the image was a survivor, a woman who had escaped a crumbling Europe, who watched her home country fall into darkness, who used her fame to rally against fascism, entertain troops on the front lines, and spit in the face of tyranny. She wasn't just beautiful, she was brave. And even as Hollywood tried to control her, reshape her, tame her, she never let it. She knew who she was, and more importantly, she knew what she wasn't. Obedient, convenient, safe. Marlene Dietrich came from a cold world, and she set it on fire with nothing but her defiance. She came from nothing, and made the whole world watch, on her terms. They weren't born into fame. They weren't handed red carpets or silver screens. They came from broken homes, from cold streets, from places the world forgets, and yet they became unforgettable. Through poverty, pain, rejection, and reinvention, these 15 stars didn't just make it in Hollywood. They rewrote what it meant to rise, not with privilege, not with luck, but with unshakable will. They were the outsiders who became icons, the forgotten who became forever, and their stories remind us, no matter where you start, no dream is too far. If these stories moved you, inspired you, or reminded you why we still look back at old Hollywood with awe, then don't leave just yet. Like this video to help others discover these legends. Subscribe for more untold stories from the golden age of cinema. And leave a comment. Who inspired you the most? Because these stars came from nothing, and still, they reached everyone.